Chapter 12, Part 1 of the Life of Harriet Beecher Stowe, compiled from her letters and journals by her son Charles Edward Stowe. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 12, Dred, 1856, Part 1. Second visit to England, a glimpse at the Queen, the Duke of Argyll and Inverary, early correspondence with Lady Byron, Dunrobin Castle and its inmates, a visit to Stowe Park, Lord Dufferin, Charles Kingsley at home, Paris revisited, Madame Mal's receptions. After reaching England about the middle of August, 1856, Mrs. Stowe and her husband spent some days in London completing arrangements to have an English edition of Dred published by Sampson Low and Company. Professor Stowe's duties in America being very pressing, he had intended returning at once, but was detained for a short time, as will be seen in the following letter written by him from Glasgow, August 29th, to a friend in America. Dear friend, I finished my business in London on Wednesday, and intended to return by the Liverpool steamer of tomorrow, but find that every berth on that line is engaged until the 3rd of October. We therefore came here yesterday, and I shall take passage in the steamer New York from this port next Tuesday. We have received a special invitation to visit Inverary Castle, the seat of the Duke of Argyll, and yesterday we had just the very pleasantest little interview with the Queen that ever was. None of the formal drawing-room breathless receptions, but just an accidental, done-on-purpose meeting at a railway station while on our way to Scotland. The Queen seemed really delighted to see my wife, and remarkably glad to see me for her sake. She pointed us out to Prince Albert, who made 2 most gracious bows to my wife and 2 to me, while the 4 royal children stared their big blue eyes almost out, looking at the little authoress of Uncle Tom's Cabin. Colonel Grey handed the Queen, with my wife's compliments, a copy of the new book, Dred. She took 1 volume herself and handed the other to Prince Albert, and they were soon both very busy reading. She is a real nice little body, with exceedingly pleasant, kindly manners. I expect to be in Natick the last week in September. God bless you all. C. E. Stowe. After her husband's departure for the United States, Mrs. Stowe, with her son Henry, her 2 eldest daughters, and her sister Mary, Mrs. Perkins, accepted the Duke of Argyll's invitation to visit the Highlands. Of this visit we catch a pleasant glimpse from a letter written to Professor Stowe during its continuance, which is as follows. Inverary Castle, September 6, 1856. My dear husband, we have been now a week in this delicious place, enjoying the finest skies and scenery, the utmost of kind hospitality. From Loch Goil we took the coach for Inverary, a beautiful drive of about 2 hours. We had seats on the outside, and the driver, John, like some of the White Mountain guides, was full of song and story and local tradition. He spoke Scotch and Gaelic, recited ballads, and sung songs with great gusto. Mary and the girls stopped in a little inn at St. Catherine's on the shores of Loch Fyne, while Henry and I took steamboat for Inverary, where we found the Duchess waiting in a carriage for us with Lady Emma Campbell. The common routine of the day here is as follows. We rise about 8:30. About 9:30 we all meet in the dining-hall, where the servants are standing in a line down one side, and a row of chairs for guests and visitors occupies the other. The Duchess, with her 9 children, a perfectly beautiful little flock, sit together. The Duke reads the Bible and a prayer, and pronounces the benediction. After that, breakfast is served, a very hearty, informal, cheerful meal, and after that come walks, or drives, or fishing parties, till lunch-time, and then more drives, or anything else. Everybody, in short, doing what he likes till 7:30, which is the dinner hour. After that we have coffee and tea in the evening. The first morning the Duke took me to see his mine of nickel silver. We had a long and beautiful drive, and talked about everything in literature, religion, morals, and the temperance movement, about which last he is in some state of doubt and uncertainty, not inclining, I think, to have it pressed yet, though feeling there is need of doing something. If Dred has as good a sale in America as it is likely to have in England, we shall do well. There is such a demand that they had to placard a shop window in Glasgow with, "To prevent disappointment, Dred, not to be had till," etc. Everybody is after it, and the prospect is of an enormous sale. God, to whom I prayed night and day while I was writing the book, has heard me and given us of worldly goods more than I asked. I feel, therefore, a desire to walk softly and inquire for what has he so trusted us. Every day I am more charmed with the Duke and Duchess. They are simple-hearted, frank, natural, full of feeling, of piety and good sense. They certainly are, apart from any considerations of rank or position, most interesting and noble people. The Duke laughed heartily at many things I told him of our Andover theological tactics, of your preaching, etc., but I think he is a sincere, earnest Christian. Our American politics form a daily topic of interest. The late movements in Congress are discussed with great warmth, and every morning the papers are watched for new details. I must stop now, as it is late, and we are to leave here early tomorrow morning. We are going to Staffa, Iona, the pass of Glencoe, and finally through the Caledonian Canal up to Dunrobin Castle, where a large party of all sorts of interesting people are gathered around the Duchess of Sutherland. Affectionately yours, Harriet. From Dunrobin Castle, one of his daughters writes to Professor Stowe, "We spent 5 most delightful days at Inverary, and were so sorry you could not be there with us. From there we went to Oban, and spent several days sightseeing, finally reaching Inverness by way of the Caledonian Canal. Here, to our surprise, we found our rooms at the hotel all prepared for us. The next morning we left by post for Dunrobin, which is 59 miles from Inverness. At the borders of the Duke's estate we found a delightfully comfortable carriage awaiting us, and before we had gone much farther the postilion announced that the Duchess was coming to meet us. Sure enough, as we looked up the road, we saw a fine cavalcade approaching. It consisted of a splendid coach and 4, in which sat the Duchess, with liveried postilions, and a number of outriders, one of whom rode in front to clear the way. The Duchess seemed perfectly delighted to see Mamma, and taking her into her own carriage, dashed off towards the castle, we following on behind." At Dunrobin, Mrs. Stowe found awaiting her the following note from her friend Lady Byron. "London, September 10th, 1856. Your book, dear Mrs. Stowe, is of the little leaven kind, and must prove a great moral force, perhaps not manifestly, so much as secretly, and yet I can hardly conceive so much power without immediate and sensible effects. Only there will be a strong disposition to resist on the part of all the hollow-hearted professors of religion whose heathenisms you so unsparingly expose. They have a class feeling like others. To the young, and to those who do not reflect much on what is offered to their belief, you will do great good by showing how spiritual food is adulterated. The bread from heaven is in the same case as baker's bread. I feel that one perusal is not enough. It is a mine, to use your own simile. If there is truth in what I heard Lord Byron say, that works of fiction lived only by the amount of truth which they contained, your story is sure of long life. I know now, more than before, how to value communion with you. With kind regards to your family, yours affectionately, A.T. Noel Byron." From this pleasant abiding-place Mrs. Stowe writes to her husband. "Dunrobin Castle, September 15th, 1856. My dear husband, everything here is like a fairy story. The place is beautiful. It is the most perfect combination of architectural and poetic romance, with home comfort. The people, too, are charming. We have here Mr. La Boucherie, a cabinet minister, and Lady Mary, his wife. I like him very much, and her too. Kingsley's brother, a very entertaining man. And tomorrow Lord Ellesmere is expected. I wish you could be here, for I am sure you would like it. Life is so quiet and sincere and friendly that you would feel more as if you had come at the hearts of these people than in London. The Sutherland estate looks like a garden. We stopped at the town of Frayan 4 miles before we reached Sutherlandshire, where a crowd of well-to-do, nice-looking people gathered around the carriage, and as we drove off gave 3 cheers. This was better than I expected, and looks well for their opinion of my views. Dred is selling over here wonderfully. Lowe says, with all the means at his command, he has not been able to meet the demand. He sold 50,000 in 2 weeks, and probably will sell as many more. I am showered with letters, private and printed, in which the only difficulty is to know what the writers would be at. I see evidently happiness and prosperity all through the line of this estate. I see the Duke giving his thought and time, and spending the whole income of this estate in improvements upon it. I see the Duke and Duchess evidently beloved wherever they move. I see them most amiable, most Christian, most considerate to everybody. The writers of the letters admit the goodness of the Duke, but denounce the system, and beg me to observe its effects for myself. I do observe that, compared to any other part of the Highlands, Sutherland is a garden. I observe well-clothed people, thriving lands, healthy children, fine schoolhouses, and all that. Henry was invited to the tenants' dinner, where he excited much amusement by pledging every toast in fair water, as he has done invariably on all occasions since he has been here. The Duchess last night showed me her copy of Dred, in which she has marked what most struck or pleased her. I begged it, and am going to send it to you. She said to me this morning at breakfast, "The Queen says that she began Dred the very minute she got it, and is deeply interested in it." She bought a copy of Lowell's poems, and begged me to mark the best ones for her, so if you see him, tell him that we have been reading him together. She is, taking her all in all, one of the noblest appointed women I ever saw, real, old, genuine English, such as one reads of in history, full of nobility, courage, tenderness, and zeal. It does me good to hear her read prayers daily, as she does, in the midst of her servants and guests, with a manner full of grand and noble feeling. Thursday morning, September 25th. We were obliged to get up at 5:30 the morning we left Dunrobin, an effort when one doesn't go to bed till 1 o'clock. We found breakfast laid for us in the library, and before we had quite finished, the Duchess came in. Our starting off was quite an imposing sight. First came the Duke's landau, in which were Mary, the Duke, and myself, then a carriage in which were Eliza and Hattie, and finally the carriage which we had hired, with Henry, our baggage, and Mr. Jackson, the Duke's secretary. The gardener sent a fresh bouquet for each of us, and there was such a leave-taking, as if we were old and dear friends. We did really love them, and had no doubt of their love for us. The Duke rode with us as far as Dornoch, where he showed us the cathedral beneath which his ancestors are buried, and where is a statue of his father, similar to one the tenants have erected on top of the highest hill in the neighborhood. We also saw the prison, which had but 2 inmates, and the old castle. Here the Duke took leave of us, and taking our own carriage, we crossed the ferry and continued on our way. After a very bad night's rest at Inverness, in consequence of the town's being so full of people attending some Highland games that we could have no places at the hotel, and after a weary ride in the rain, we came into Aberdeen Friday morning. Tomorrow we go on to Edinburgh, where I hope to meet a letter from you. The last I heard from Lowe, he had sold 60,000 of Dred, and it was still selling well. I have not yet heard from America how it goes. The critics scold and whiffle and dispute about it, but on the whole it is a success, so the Times says, with much coughing, hemming, and standing first on one foot and then on the other. If the Times were sure we should beat in the next election, Dred would go up in the scale. But as long as there is uncertainty, it has first one line of praise and then one of blame." End quote. Henry Stowe returned to America in October to enter Dartmouth College, while the rest of the party pursued their way southward, as will be seen by the following letters. City of New York, October 10th, 1856. Dear husband, Henry will tell you all about our journey, and at present I have but little time for details. I received your first letter with great joy, relief, and gratitude, first to God for restoring your health and strength, and then to you for so good, long, and refreshing a letter. Henry, I hope, comes home with a serious determination to do well and be a comfort. Seldom has a young man seen what he has in this journey, or made more valuable friends. Since we left Aberdeen, from which place my last was mailed, we have visited Edinburgh with abounding delight, thence yesterday to Newcastle. Last night attended service in Durham Cathedral, and after that came to York, whence we send Henry to Liverpool. I send you letters, etc., by him. 100,000 copies of Dred sold in 4 weeks. After that, who cares what critics say? Its success in England has been complete, so far as sale is concerned. It is very bitterly attacked, both from a literary and a religious point of view. The Record is down upon it with a cartload of solemnity. The Athenaeum with waspish spite, the Edinburgh goes out of its way to say that the author knows nothing of the society she describes, and yet it goes everywhere, is read everywhere, and Mr. Lowe says that he puts the 125,000 to press confidently. The fact that so many good judges like it better than Uncle Tom is success enough. In my journal to Henry, which you may look for next week, you will learn how I have been very near the Queen, and formed acquaintance with divers of her lords and ladies, and heard all she has said about Dred, how she prefers it to Uncle Tom, how she inquired for you, and other matters. Till then, I am, as ever, your affectionate wife, H.B. Stowe. After leaving York, Mrs. Stowe and her party spent a day or two at Carlton Rectory on the edge of Sherwood Forest, in which they enjoyed a most delightful picnic. From there they were to travel to London by way of Warwick and Oxford, and of this journey Mrs. Stowe writes as follows to her son Henry. Quote, "The next morning we were induced to send our things to London, being assured by Mr. G. that he would dispatch them immediately with some things of his own that were going, and that they should certainly await us upon our arrival. In one respect it was well for us that we thus rid ourselves of the trouble of looking after them, for I never saw such blind, confusing arrangements as these English railroads have. When we were set down at the place where we were to change for Warwick, we were informed that probably the train had gone. At any rate, it could only be found on the other side of the station. You might naturally think we had nothing to do but walk across to the other side. No, indeed. We had to ascend a flight of stairs, go through a sort of tubular bridge, and down another pair of stairs. When we got there, the guard said the train was just about to start, and yet the ticket office was closed. We tried the door in vain. 'You must hurry,' said the guard. 'How can we,' said I, 'when we can't get tickets?' He went and thumped, and at last roused the dormant intelligence inside. We got our tickets, ran for dear life, got in, and then waited 10 minutes. Arriving at Warwick, we had a very charming time, and after seeing all there was to see, we took cars for Oxford. The next day we tried to see Oxford. You can have no idea of it. Call it a college. It is a city of colleges, a mountain of museums, colleges, halls, courts, parks, chapels, lecture rooms. Out of 24 colleges we saw only 3. We saw enough, however, to show us that to explore the colleges of Oxford would take a week. Then we came away, and about 11 o'clock at night found ourselves in London. It was dripping and raining here, for all the world just as it did when we left, but we found a cosy little parlour, papered with cheerful crimson paper, lighted by a coal fire, a neat little supper laid out, and the Misses Lowe waiting for us. Wasn't it nice? We are expecting our baggage tonight. Called at Sampson Low's store today and found it full everywhere of red dreads." Upon reaching London, Mrs. Stowe found the following note from Lady Byron awaiting her. Oxford House, October 15th, 1856. Dear Mrs. Stowe, the newspapers represent you as returning to London, but I cannot wait for the chance, slender I fear, of seeing you there, for I wish to consult you on a point admitting but of little delay. Feeling that the sufferers in Kansas have a claim not only to sympathy but to the expression of it, I wish to send them a donation. It is, however, necessary to know what is the best application of money and what the safest channel. Presuming that you will approve the object, I ask you to tell me. Perhaps you would undertake the transmission of my £50. My present residence, 2 miles beyond Richmond, is opposite. I have watched for instructions of your course with warm interest. The sale of your book will go on increasing. It is beginning to be understood. Believe me, with kind regards to your daughters, your faithful and affectionate A.T. Noel Byron. To this note the following answer was promptly returned. Grove Terrace, Kentish Town, October 16, 1856. Dear Lady Byron, how glad I was to see your handwriting once more! How more than glad I should be to see you! I do long to see you. I have so much to say, so much to ask, and need to be refreshed with a sense of congenial and sympathetic soul. Thank you, my dear friend, for your sympathy with our poor sufferers in Kansas. May God bless you for it. By doing this you will step to my side. Perhaps you may share something of that abuse which they who know not what they do heap upon all who so feel for the right. I assure you, dear friend, I am not insensible to the fiery darts which thus fly around me. Direct as usual to my publishers, and believe me, as ever, with all my heart, affectionately yours, H. B. Stowe. End of Chapter 12, Part 1. Read by Michelle Fry, Baton Rouge, Louisiana.